and welcome to Sportswomen Connect. On today's episode, we are going to be talking about media coverage for sport with special emphasis for women in sport and how it can help generate interest for women's sports. To join me in this conversation is a seasoned journalist from Vancouver, Canada. Lucas, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Kindly tell us a little bit about yourself before we dive into the topic for today.
Well, first let me say that I'm excited to be here in Uganda. It's my first day here and just my second time in Africa.
Wow.
I am a sports writer and a travel writer, and travel writing is actually what brought me here. I will be touring around your country and meeting the gorillas of the windy impenetrable forest.
You're most welcome.
I hope. And visiting some coffee plantations and things like that. But when I'm not writing travel stories for outlets like the Washington Post or National Geographic, I also write about sports. And I have a certain specialization in women's sports with ice hockey. This is something that I've covered for about 20 years now.
Whoa.
I know, it's crazy.
That's quite some time.
I have a hard time believing it myself. But I've been lucky enough to cover the last 5 Winter Olympics, starting in Salt Lake 2002 and every Winter Olympics since then, and covering both women's hockey, ice hockey, and men's ice hockey at those tournaments. And I've also done 3 Women's World Hockey Championships. Winnipeg in 2007, and Malmo, Sweden in 2015, and Kamloops, Canada, which is just a little way from my native Vancouver, about a 4-hour drive back in 2016.
That's quite a history.
Yeah, so
well done.
Thank you.
How's been your experience so far?
Oh, it's been fantastic. I mean, right now, if we look around the world, and I know hockey is obviously not a very big sport here in Uganda.
Oh, we only do hockey on the grass, so.
Well, it's an exciting sport. It's fast-paced, it's physical, it's passionate, there's a lot of skill. Of course, it is also an expensive sport because there's a lot of equipment involved. You need hockey sticks, you need helmets, you need padding, you need hockey skates. And of course, you need access to ice. And if you look at the African continent, there's only one country really participating in hockey right now, which is South Africa. And they're still developing, obviously. But if you look at the world overall, there's about 1.8 million registered hockey players worldwide. And approximately 200,000 of those are women. So it's a young sport. The first Women's World Hockey Championship was in Ottawa, Canada in 1990. And then the International Olympic Committee accepted it as a full-fledged sport in 1998.
Wow.
And that first Olympic tournament for women took place in Nagano, Japan. And it's come a long way since then. Numbers are rising in registration, especially in Canada and the United States. They account for about 88,000 and 80,000 participants respectively. And so it's not really surprising that they have dominated the sport historically, but it's fun for me because being Canadian, hockey is what it's all about.
Yeah, you just love the sport. You're like, yes.
Exactly. It's like what football is like in the rest of the world. We've got hockey up here, and then these other sports, you know, basketball, baseball, you know. And
just to take you a little bit, what is the state of reporting or media coverage for ice hockey, for example?
Well, it's getting better, but there's still a lot of work to be done, especially in the women's area. I mean, let me give you a specific example. The Canadian Women's Hockey League is the top professional women's hockey league in Canada right now. And in total this year on Sportsnet, one of our major cable sports channels, there were 4 women's games scheduled. Only 4. There was 2 regular season games, and then the All-Star game, and also the Clarkson Cup final. The championship game will also be televised, but that's it. And you know, that's an improvement compared to where it's been in previous years. I will say that coming off of the 2018 Olympic final, there has been an uptick in interest in women's hockey in general, and also just more media coverage. I know personally, I've done 3 articles in the last 5 months or so for the New York Times about women's ice hockey, both American players and Canadian players.
Okay.
And that's something that we didn't see in the past.
Yeah, especially for women in sport.
Well, I'll say personally that I enjoy being around that atmosphere because I think when you cover sports at the highest level, especially in the professional leagues, when you're dealing with guys who are earning $5 million or $10 million a year, things become very corporate. You know, people are taken aside by their PR handlers. They're only allowed to speak briefly. They speak in cliches. They speak in ways they're going to please their corporate masters. And that's not so exciting. Women's hockey is still in that state of development. Like I said, a young sport. You know, it's getting better. And as a reporter, it's exciting to be part of something and to see it growing and progressing. Right now in Canada, despite, you know, the passion for hockey and the growing interest in women's hockey, it's still only around 5% of the total media coverage that goes towards women's sports. Hopefully that's starting to trend up right now.
Actually less.
Yeah, and when you think about it, how does that make any sense when you have 51% of the population getting 5% of the coverage? Even if you assume that women are not going to be as interested in sports as men, it still should be higher, regardless of how you look at it. Even if you're only interested in it as an economic driver, it still makes sense to invest more in women who are there. Yes, because they are an untapped market in many respects.
And with regard to women in sport leadership, how is it covered? What is the, let me just say, in terms of coaching and officiation and leadership, what would you say is happening in Canada, for example, for women in those positions?
Well, it's a work in progress. I mean, certainly we are seeing more female coaches certified, and you know, the teams in the Canadian Women's Hockey League, which is a high level, those are primarily run by female general managers. But there could be more, and it's important because women typically bring a little bit of a different emphasis as coaches and as general managers. They take more interest in their players' personal situations, and they're interested in developing people, not just athletes, not just robots who go out and get goals and assists.
That's true. And what are we doing about increasing media coverage for women in sport?
Well, I think you have to capitalize on opportunities that are there. And I think when I look at the case of hockey, for instance, there has been an uptick, and I'm seeing outlets that were not covering women's hockey very thoroughly in the past, doing so more in the aftermath of the 2018 Olympic women's hockey final. It was a very exciting game. The United States ended up defeating Canada 3-2 in a shootout. Very dramatic. The winning goal was a very fancy move, and the American goalie made a nice stop to save it. And after that, what ended up happening was the American team went on a victory tour, and you know, it's the United States, right? Razzmatazz, let's go, baby. And you have to take advantage of opportunities like that because there's a ripple effect. In their case, they went on big TV shows like The Tonight Show or Ellen or Saturday Night Live. These are shows that are syndicated all over the world. And you get more visibility from that. The American colleges, which are so important for the development of elite women's hockey and attract players from all over the world, those programs end up getting more funding. So even though obviously Canada was not very pleased with this result after having won the previous 4 women's Olympic hockey gold medals in a row.
Things have to change a bit.
But things have to be competitive. You can't always just have the same people winning over and over again. And that's why it's also hopefully in the big picture, these other countries like Finland and Russia and Switzerland will start to get in there and get into the gold and silver medals as well.
Okay. And what interventions do you propose that we could adopt, for example, to get more women or more coverage for women in sport, more media coverage for women in sport?
Well, I actually spoke about this at the International Ice Hockey Federation Congress in Copenhagen last year, and I identified 3 keys to getting more coverage of women's hockey in the media, but this could be applied to other sports as well. First, you need to make yourself available and visible. Because, let's face it, we're in a 24-hour news cycle. There's so many different distractions. Hockey, like every other sport, is competing for its piece of the pie. So if you are in charge of publicity for a women's sports club, you should be putting out press releases regularly. You should have an active social media presence on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all those other avenues. Find ways to get people interacting with your club too. The Toronto Furies women's hockey team enables people to come out and skate with them, you know, to learn about ice hockey firsthand from professionals. Invite the press to come and cover that too. You also need to make sure that when you do get journalists' attention, give them what they need. Make sure that the players, the athletes are there, willing to be interviewed, show up on time, talk like an interesting human being, not like a robot. Always a challenge for athletes. Photos. We live in a visual age right now. You know, if you're trying to promote a sport or a team, make sure you have a lot of nice digital photos that are ready to go, so the journalists have that. And it's also important to be creative about things. One of the stories I did for the New York Times this year was about a player named Megan Agosta. She was the MVP, the most valuable player of the 2010 Women's Olympic Hockey Tournament in Vancouver. And she has a very interesting story to tell, because while she was trained to be an Olympic athlete, she was also working as a police officer for the Vancouver Police Department.
That's tough.
That's very tough. And she would have to get up at crazy hours. You know, like she works different shifts. And it's being a police officer, right? That's not an easy job.
No, it's not.
And on top of that, she just gave birth to her first child. So she's busy. And I know you understand the challenges of motherhood.
I do.
So that's an interesting story, right? And I wanted to tell that story. And, you know, it's a story that has broad appeal. So it's important to be creative and seek out these stories, these human interest stories that, you know, are interesting stories even if you're not inherently a fan of women's hockey or women's soccer or anything else. Because I know this story from the New York Times ended up being syndicated right across Canada by the Globe and Mail, the Canadian national newspaper. And it also even ended up being translated, and this surprised me, into Portuguese. It showed up in the largest newspaper in Brazil. And you know, Brazil, it's not much of a bigger hockey nation than Uganda, right? It's
we are almost in the same bracket.
they like their football. So be creative. I mean, I've even done a travel story this year where I interviewed 4 of the top women's hockey stars.
I've seen that one.
Oh, thank you. And I asked them, where would you like to go on vacation, or where have you traveled for hockey? You know, so find different ways to make it interesting for people. Although with that said, I think it's also important that over time, you do need to have the scores and the fixtures and what's coming up this weekend there too, because, you know, that's how you build visibility. People have to know what's going on. If they don't know that a league exists or a club exists, or that, you know, somebody has just won 10 games in a row, male sports teams get these kind of stories done about them all the time. You need that for the women's side too.
What inspired you to get into women in sport? Reporting for women in sport specifically?
Well, it's a combination of things. I would certainly say that I came to women's hockey first as a hockey fan. I actually went to a taping of a Canadian Broadcasting Corporation show in Vancouver. It was just before the 1998 Olympics in Japan, and there was an exhibition game between the Canadian national women's team and the American women's team taking place at General Motors Place, the big hockey arena in Vancouver. And there were free tickets. I was like, well, I should go. It's hockey. And I was really captivated. There was 15,000 people there. There were screams, young girls in the stands, really excited to see what was going on. I thought, well, I have to be part of this story. And then 2 years later, I interviewed Hayley Wickenheiser, who would go on to be the greatest female hockey player of all time,
Yeah.
for a magazine called Sports Illustrated for Women, which was a spin-off from
Yeah.
the American Sports Illustrated magazine at the time.
Yeah.
And it just really built from there. But, you know, I mean, I come from a family with a literary background as well. My mother was a freelance journalist as well.
Okay.
She was not particularly focused on sport, but you know, she did write about men's hockey from time to time. My sister works in publishing, so you know, I think it's a combination of a passion for hockey and just a sense of, you know, the value of seeing women engaged in sport and excited about it and benefiting from it, whether it's as a fan or as an athlete.
Okay. And it is very, very hard to be a sportswoman in Uganda. Yeah? How do you encourage more girls to join sport?
Well, I think you have to have visible role models. You know, they say if you can see it, then you can be it. So we've talked about, you know, making sure you have those high-profile people, those Olympians in the media on a regular basis. But you also have to be willing to create environments where girls are comfortable and can thrive. You know, you have to have coaches who are willing to communicate and to, you know, create a social atmosphere in sports. I mean, I was just talking about Haley Wickenheiser.
Yeah.
She has a festival for girls called WickFest, which is all about bringing girls into hockey. And, you know, I just covered her tournament in Surrey outside Vancouver.
Yeah.
And the fun thing about it is it's not just a girls hockey tournament with 50 teams. It's a chance to make new friends.
Yeah.
You know, in this case, there were teams from the province of British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, American teams. You're making new friends,
Yeah.
but you're also learning, you know, life skills.
Life skills, yes.
You're learning how to
To
communicate.
communicate,
Yeah,
That's
and
true.
you're learning that
teamwork. Yeah.
but also leadership and you know, stepping up. It's all those things. And if you can show girls that they're going to take those lessons
Yeah.
away from sport, even if they don't go on to be Olympians, they can still take it into their regular lives, their
Yeah.
professional lives, and just feel better about themselves and where they're going.
That's very true. And here we have like very few women reporting about women in sport. The numbers are very, very low. How would you encourage them to do what you're doing, for example?
Well, again, I think you have to be willing to mentor and to talk to people. I mean, yeah, absolutely. It's not very different in Canada. When you go to a sports press box, it tends to be very male-dominated, and I can understand how it would be an intimidating atmosphere for a woman to come into that environment. But I think you have to be proactive.
Yeah.
You have to encourage, even if you're a male-dominated organization, to seek out female reporters,
Yeah.
put them in responsible roles of oversight, be willing to promote, and be willing to listen, and just, you know, remember, we're all human beings here. You know, we all love sport for our own reasons.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, it's a guy's thing only, it's testosterone, it's World War III. You have to find the fun in it and the human interest side of it.
And Lucas, if you had one wish to a female reporter or any reporter out there, what would it be?
To follow your passion. Just, you know, don't let anybody tell you that you can't do it. Find people within the sport or sports that you want to cover who are willing to support you. Ask for support, but go do it. Don't think about it too much. Go do it.
Just do it.
Yeah, and we have this atmosphere now, you know, with the internet, where you can start your career so much quicker than you could in the past. You know, I covered my first World Hockey Championship when I was 25 years old, and at that tournament, I got in because I was working for a website.
Okay.
I had interned at a radio station in Vancouver. They sent their sports director. He was 60-something years old. I said if I'd stayed at the radio station, I would have had to wait till I'm that old. But now, you know, if you're a good writer, a good journalist, you can get your work up on the internet right away, and it's about the quality of the work you do.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the great things about the internet is the democratization. You know, if you can do good work, you'll stand out.
You'll stand out and
Yeah.
you'll give your best.
Exactly.
Yeah. I just want to thank you so much for taking your time to, I mean, it's your first day in Uganda, and here you are talking about sports so passionately. I want to thank you for your time, and to all our dear viewers, we thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, goodbye.